All right, let's talk about the 4070 Ti Super.
Ti Super. 4070 Ti Super.
That's a Ti? Well, today we're going to be talking about the 4070 Ti Super. And I have this card right here on my desk. Fancy camera angle. Whoa, that's so cool. But yeah, this card is the Asus TUF model of the 4070 Ti Super. This name is so long that in my benchmarks, I had to shrink it so that it could fit on the screen. An $800 graphics card that is launching on January 24th. So this will be coming out tomorrow. This 4070 Ti's main competitor is actually, you didn't see that. I know how to tie a tie. Now the 7900 XT goes for around $710 right now because AMD made a major price cut. If we just click on one of these cards and we can see the price history on this thing, you can see that it dropped off of a cliff within the past few days. And yeah, I bought this one myself, the 7900 XT, for $720, and it honestly made my freaking heart sink. Like, that's still a lot of money. It's cheaper than the $800 Nvidia card right now, but ooh, that is a lot of freaking money to spend on a graphics card. Nvidia also sent me this one, and you probably saw it on the desk. This is a 4070 Super. So just the normal 4070 Super model. It's all blacked out and everything. This card goes for $600 right now, and it seems like there's still some models that are going for that $600 price point. So just at a base level, the 4070 Ti Super, let's just look at the specs of this card. Video Cards has a great chart here. It is an upgrade to the original 4070 Ti, and Nvidia is axing the original 4070 Ti. It has more CUDA cores, and it has more VRAM. This is the big thing because the original 4070 Ti was limited heavily by 12 gigabytes of VRAM, but we're seeing 16 gigabytes on the 4070 Ti Super. So what we're gonna do is break down the $600 graphics card, $700 graphics card, and $800 graphics card to see which one in this like price range will be right for you. No matter what, all these cards are still very fast. Let's first go on an overview of these cards' performance, and then we're gonna get into a deep dive, whole bunch of different games, a whole bunch of settings, ray tracing, DLSS. But let's go over the overview first, starting off with the 7900 XT versus the 4070 Ti Super. So let's first start off with the ray tracing type of stuff. We got to get this out of the way because as you would think, Nvidia's 4070 Ti Super does have an advantage in ray tracing versus the 7900 XT from AMD. The thing is, like, in lighter titles though, AMD's card does pretty well, as we see in like hardware ray tracing in Fortnite, Resident Evil 4 Remake, it's putting up a good fight in the ray tracing preset. In Plague Tale Requiem, it's even putting up a pretty good fight, though at times the 4070 Ti Super can pull quite far ahead. But it's really in the games that are like Alan Wake 2, Cyberpunk, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which are very heavy ray tracing titles, that where the 7900 XT really starts to fall behind. But even in these games, there's still options that you can get a lot of good performance out of the 7900 XT, but kind of avoiding the ray tracing and stuff like that. It's also to take into account, even with the 4070 Ti Super, this brand new card from Nvidia that costs $800, even this card can struggle to do like path tracing in Cyberpunk. It can struggle to do path tracing in Alan Wake 2. And in these games, you have to use quite a bit of upscaling to get, to like 60 FPS. Or if you want to get to above 60 FPS, I mean, you're asking for like DLSS performance mode, which is literally rendering the game. If you're at 1440p, you're rendering the game at 720p. Even this $800 card from Nvidia isn't exactly like awe-inspiring in terms of ray tracing, because when we get to the traditional rasterized performance of these cards, that's where it gets super. So you see what I did there? I said the super. It gets super interesting. Oh my God, man. The 7900 XT is about 10% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. Like in Alan Wake 2, if you don't turn on ray tracing, we see at 1440p native settings that it's 14% faster on the 7900 XT. And like if you turn on FSR quality in that game or DLSS quality on the Nvidia card, then you're getting 30% more performance on the 7900 XT. Plague Tale Requiem, again, ray tracing performed better on the Nvidia card, but the 7900 XT is faster than the Nvidia card if you don't use ray tracing. Now, this isn't to say that it's faster in every single game, but in a lot of games, what I found is that on average, it seems to work out. The 7900 XT, when you're not using ray tracing, that it is about 10% faster than the 4070 Ti Super. But when you take into account the price as well, it's 11% cheaper. So that's like a 20% delta in terms of price to performance for the AMD card here. And that price cut that AMD made seems like it is worth like it at that price point. And plus on the AMD card, like you're also getting 20 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, like I know with the 4070 Ti Super, it's super nice that it has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. 16 gigabytes is probably enough, okay? Especially for 1440p, but even at 4K, you can probably just use 16 gigabytes of VRAM and be perfectly fine in a lot of games. Having 20 gigabytes on the 7900 XT is definitely a nice to have. It's not entirely necessary, but it gives you some peace of mind, and it'll probably be better at 4K in a very short period of time. The real question, are either of these cards actually worth, you know, getting the price premium over than Nvidia's brand new 4070 Super? So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. And this might actually surprise you, but both of these more expensive cards actually do justify the price premium. For example, with the 7900 XT, you're paying 17% more money compared to the 4070 Super, but you're getting about 40% more performance in rasterization in games. 40%. That is a lot more performance. Remnant 2, for example, this game was insanely different on the 7900 XT. Like we're talking like 60% more performance across the scale at a lot of different settings. The average might work out that it's close to 40% more performance. I mean, you could argue that maybe it's like 30% faster than the 4070 Super. Combined with that and getting more VRAM by paying a little bit more money is not bad on the AMD's side here with the 7900 XT. You know, if we do look at ray tracing, the gap tightens up a little bit. So if you're after ray tracing, you might still want to go with the cheaper Nvidia card. But the 4070 Ti Super, well, it doesn't look as good as the AMD card. On average, from what I saw in these games, the 4070 Ti Super was about 25% faster than the 4070 Super, but it costs 33% more. So it's actually a negative price to performance ratio. You also get all the same advantages that you do with the 4070 Super, like because it's an Nvidia card, you get better ray tracing, you get DLSS and stuff compared to AMD's 7900 XT. The main price premium for the 4070 Ti Super is that 16 gigabytes of VRAM, because on the 4070, because it only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, it's pretty much stuck playing at 1440p. In a lot of games, you're going to struggle to go up to 4K on a graphics card that sadly does cost $600. I wish we got more VRAM at $600. But yeah, the 4070 Super is pretty much limited to 1440p most of the time. And sometimes at 1440p, 12 gigabytes is already handicapping this card. Although the power consumption of these cards might be something that could convince you. 4070 Super, if we look at the total system power consumption, I have a test PC now that's open air and everything. So if we're looking at temperatures here, this is all open air testing. The total system power with a 7800X 3D processor in the system, we're talking only 336 watts. So if you really are after power efficiency, you're getting a lot of performance for very little power on this card. I wouldn't even call either the 7900 XT or the 4070 Ti Super power inefficient. It's just that they use more. Let's just talk about the models of cards that I have here. Nvidia's Founders Edition 4070 Super. I mean, it ran really cool and quiet. All of these cards actually were under 70 degrees, but Nvidia's Founders Edition card is very premium, awesome to experience. But this card is at like 67 degrees. The fans were only at 1800 RPM. They were very quiet. The 7900 XT from ASRock here, I got the white version because I've never had a white card before and it looks kind of cool. The fans were only at 1000 RPM. So this guy was like damn near silent. This card is so quiet. The GPU is only at 63 degrees. It's probably because this card is absolutely ginormous. And then if you look at the 4070 Ti Super, the Asus TUF model, now this card usually goes for a little bit more than MSRP. The GPU temperature was only at 61 degrees and the fan speed was at 1400 RPM. Really quiet fans. I mean, like in terms of the noise performance, all of these cards were around 40 dB. And I think that 40 dB number was actually too high because I don't think any of them were louder than the CPU cooler I had on at the time. Yeah, these cards were very quiet, very high quality, but I know you're excited for it. I got tons of benchmarks. Let's look at these cards against each other. 4070 Super, 7900 XT, and the 4070 Ti Super, the new card from Nvidia that's coming out tomorrow. I literally have an hour straight of side-by-side footage. I'm not going to show you all of that. I've been a little gremlin in here doing tests for a while, so hopefully all these tests can help you. And then at the end, I'll go ahead and just share some final thoughts about how I think the new graphics card from Nvidia is compared to what is on the market at the moment. So let's jump in. All right, let's crack open one. If we jump into 1440p on Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, on the high settings at native, okay, the 7900 XT is about 7% faster than the 4070 Super. And when you take into account, it also costs, what, 17% more? That isn't exactly a good ratio, and that's because this game is a ray tracing title. The 4070 Ti Super, only 14% faster than the 4070 Super, but it costs 25% more. So not a very good showing in that case for the 4070 Ti Super. Now I just wanted to try if I turned on FSR 3 frame generation in this game, and you can actually see that AMD's card pulls further ahead when using its first party technology here. You know, obviously each of these cards have enough frame rate to get a good experience with frame generation, so definitely not a bad idea to go and turn it on. We're going to be having all of the ray tracing benchmarks other than Avatar here at the end of this whole analysis thing, so that's what we'll look at. Okay, jumping into Alan Wake 2, this is a very demanding and also very good looking title in terms of graphics, fidelity, stuff like that. At 1080p native, so DLA, which is DLSS anti-aliasing, or FSR anti-aliasing. On the high settings, no ray tracing or no added ray tracing. That might have ray tracing built into it. We can see that the 7900 XT in a game like this, which is actually Nvidia sponsored, is getting 41% more performance than the 4070 Super. You can just see this card stretch its legs, and it's actually outpacing the 4070 Ti Super. Now we jump up to 1440p on, again, native settings. High as well, no ray tracing. You can see the 7900 XT, again, 27% faster than the 4070 Super. It's very fast here. And the 4070 Ti Super compared to the 4070 Super, which costs $200 less, is not showing that much extra performance here. So honestly, it's not looking very good for the 4070 Ti Super. Now, if we turn on DLSS quality and FSR quality, you can see that we're getting really good FPS actually on all of these GPUs. I mean, 96 FPS even on the 4070 Super is more than enough to play this game in. But we can also just see that the 7900 XT, again, is just very fast here, and it's even outpacing the 4070 Ti Super even more. And surprisingly, the 4070 Super and the 4070 Ti Super are really close in terms of performance, around 90 to 97. That really isn't that much. Now, if we go ahead and go up to 4K, very demanding here, we can see that AMD's card is still pulling ahead. It's probably because of that extra VRAM. If we do look up at the top, it looks like the 4070 Super is getting limited by VRAM. Actually, a really weird thing is it's using more somehow, or it's reporting that it's using more than it actually has. It's reporting over 12 gigabytes. So it doesn't really make sense, but you can see that that is probably an advantage for the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti Super in this case at 4K. Now you can also turn on some upscaling. So just the 7900 XT is still putting up over 70 FPS, stretching its legs above the 4070 Ti Super. And you remember that this card costs less than the 4070 Ti Super. So that's definitely something to take into account. But if you do look at the 4070 Super, even at 4K here with some upscaling, it's able to produce about 60 FPS, which I think is just fine for this game. So jumping over to Cyberpunk here, this is just the high settings at native, so 1440p. This is not ray tracing or anything like that. You can see that the 7900 XT, again, is just a lot faster than the 4070 Super. 17% more expensive, but producing about 30% more performance here at 127. I mean, that feels buttery smooth when you're playing. Honestly, you could push it up to ultra settings without ray tracing and still be fine. But if we look at the 4070 Ti Super, we're seeing it's only producing about 13% more performance compared to the 4070 Super. So honestly, like looking at that, like that is not getting the price to performance ratio. I mean, it costs 25% more. The main thing you're getting there is that extra VRAM, and at these current settings, this game is not demanding more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM. You can see on the 4070 Super, it's only using about 7.3 gigabytes of VRAM. And if we turn on upscaling, I mean, the thing, it just looks even faster for these cards. Now the 7900 XT is at like 170 FPS, although the gap does get a little bit closer here with this, probably because of a memory bandwidth thing. Because if you do look at these cards, the 7900 XT has the fastest memory out of all of them because it has a 320-bit bus, whereas the 4070 Ti Super, even though it costs more because it has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, it means that it has a 256-bit bus. The 4070 Super only has a 192-bit bus. The wider the bus width, or the larger the bit number, means that you can get faster memory. So the 7900 XT, when it's able to utilize more memory and the bandwidth of it matters, then it does stretch its legs a little bit more. And that's what seems to be the advantage in some of these games. At 4K, okay, I did test 4K. Now, I don't actually have a 4K monitor per se. So this is actually just kind of, I put 4K as a resolution, then I used my capture card to like emulate what it would be at 4K. And actually see, I don't know why this happened, but the 7900 XT is slower than the other cards in this case, whereas in every other one it was faster. So I really don't know what happened here, but you can see it's 16% slower than the 4070 Super. But the 4070 Ti Super was again only 13% faster. So 25% money, again, it's not really justifying the price premium over Nvidia's lower tier option here. Now let's go into Fortnite. Now this is 1080p and we're on epic settings. So I just wanted to see, could you play at epic settings with rasterized graphics? So no ray tracing, no Nanite, no Lumen, and just to see like what kind of FPS we could crank in this game. And you can actually see that the 7900 XT at 1080p with epic settings is CPU limited. You can see the GPU is not at 100% utilization there. So that's taken into account, along with the 4070 Ti Super is also CPU limited. I mean, I think all these cards are CPU limited here. I guess using epic settings, even with a Ryzen 7800X 3D, a very fast processor, all these graphics cards are fast enough to get CPU limited, which is really fun to see when it comes down to it. But we jump into 1440p. Obviously, CPU limits aren't as much of an issue with the higher resolution. More weight is on the graphics card. You can actually see that the 7900 XT doesn't perform as well in this game. It's only 5% faster than the 4070 Super while costing 17% more. So not a very good ratio, and you don't get things like DLSS and better ray tracing performance, which we will be talking about in just a little bit. The 4070 Ti Super is 10% faster, not really justifying the price premium over the 4070 Super either. So out of this bunch, I mean, from a lot of the games we've looked at so far, the 4070 Super is the best value option. The 7900 XT, we'll see in just a little bit, can jump ahead further. At 1440p and DirectX 12, where it's more GPU limited, we can still see that the 4070 Super is faster than the 7900 XT, which does cost more. So honestly, if you want the best value Fortnite card, this is a competitive game, you probably wouldn't be playing at epic settings or anything like that, then the 4070 Super is better than the 4070 Ti Super, which costs $200 more, you know? Go to Last of Us Part 1. Now at 1080p, the 4070 Super is kind of chilling at like 140 FPS on these high settings. I mean, that is really good for a game like this. Ever since this game launched, it had a lot of problems, but nowadays it's actually a very well running and well performing title. Now 7900 XT, this game usually favors AMD a little bit, is 10% faster, but if you do look at the GPU utilization in the top, it is CPU limited up there, as well as the 4070 Ti Super, so we need to jump up in resolution to check that out. At 1440p though, at high settings, you can see that 7900 XT is able to like break free because it's not strained by a CPU limit anymore. Again, I'm using a very fast processor. The 7800X 3D is basically the fastest gaming CPU you can get right now, especially in games like this, which really like the extra cache on that processor. But 27% faster than this 7900 XT is getting a nice bump over that $600 card, justifying the price premium. As well, the 4070 Ti Super is getting 19% more performance. It's at about 128 FPS. I mean, that's really freaking smooth when it comes down to it. But it also doesn't really justify the full price premium over the card. Now we go to 1440p native at ultra settings instead of high. We can see that the 4070 Super is starting to drop down to like 90 FPS or so. But the 7900 XT is still holding at like 115 FPS average, or 114 now, and it is just like chilling. Let's go ahead and turn on that at 1440p, and we can see that the 7900 XT is now 19% faster than the 4070 Super. I'm using FSR on the AMD cards. The reason that I'm using DLSS or FSR, depending on which brand of GPU, is because if you had an Nvidia card and if the game supports DLSS, you would use DLSS in that game because it generally looks better. You can see that we're only getting 19% more performance when it's 17% more expensive on the AMD card, and the 4070 Ti Super, well, it's not really justifying that price premium at all. Only 8% faster. Now if we jump up to 4K, go to ultra settings at 4K to see if any of these cards can handle it. Now the only card that is averaging over 60 FPS here is actually the 7900 XT, getting 41% more performance than the 4070 Super. That is pretty huge, okay? I mean, the 4070 Ti Super is extremely close. Probably nobody would really care. At that point, it's still smooth. But yeah, to get that, 4K gaming experience, you'd have to jump up from the 4070 Super price point of $600 if you want that maxed out. But, that's kind of unreasonable for a lot of people. You'd probably either drop settings or you would just turn on some upscaling. Okay, so if we go to quality at 4K, the 7900 XT kind of lessens its lead. It's not 40% faster now. Now it's at about 94 FPS compared to the 4070 Super, which is at like the mid 70s FPS, which is still very playable on a card like that. And you have to remember too, in DLSS, even in this game, it looks better than FSR. That's another thing to take into account. I've done a more in-depth analysis of that in other videos if you want to check those out. Now, I just wanted to look at something like a competitive game, because just to kind of prove a point, all of these cards are way fast enough to play competitive games. Honestly, on a graphics card, if you're going to be playing light titles or competitive games, because all these cards are getting close to like 500 FPS, there's actually a 600 FPS engine limit in this, so this game doesn't allow you to go above 600 FPS. Not that you really need to, but you can see that the 7900 XT and the 4070 Ti Super are basically pushing right up against that 600 FPS limit. And the 4070 Super is at around the mid 400s, okay? Honestly, it's really good performance, and this is 1440p. You don't need more than this. I just wanted to show you this to prove a point. I wouldn't spend this much if your goal is to play light titles. This is more for like more intensive games and stuff like that. A new title that just came out, which I've actually had a lot of fun with, is called Palworld. The Pokemon with guns game. Yeah, it's this one. So I went ahead and benchmarked this. It's actually really fun. I kind of think I'm gonna get addicted to it. So yeah, I gotta record this so I can play that. But yeah, we're at high settings at 1440p, and you can see that the 7900 XT doesn't actually perform that well in this game. It's only 16% faster than the 4070 Super, and then the 4070 Ti Super is actually almost 30% faster than the 4070 Super. So that is actually a positive price to performance ratio compared to the $600 card. But something that's weird about this game is there is no FSR or temporal super resolution. This game is an Unreal Engine 5, and we can actually see very good performance in it and stuff like that. But because it doesn't have FSR or temporal super resolution, you can only really compare the 4070 Super to the 4070 Ti Super within this game. Now, I should have put a black box in the middle here, but that's what it looks like. That's the little alpaca thing that I'm riding on. And it looks beautiful too. Like, this is Unreal Engine 5 and it runs great, okay? It runs like Fortnite if you don't turn on Lumen and Nanite and stuff like that. Like, it's super smooth. Just showing that Unreal Engine 5 games can run good. It takes a good team to make them run well. The 4K, you can obviously see that all the cards drop down a little bit. Now pay attention to the FPS numbers. I think the 4070 Super looks a little bit choppy here, but it didn't actually run choppy. That's just how the capture card picked it up. But we can see that the 4070 Super is barely getting about 60 FPS here, but the 1% lows are dipping into around the 50s. And then if we go to the 7900 XT, I just don't think this game runs very well on AMD cards. It's only 16% faster here, even though we went to 4K, where usually that card performs better because of the more VRAM and stuff like that. And, you know, you can see the 1% lows are a lot lower as well in the 40s, whereas the 4070 Ti Super is able to stretch its legs here, costing $800 and actually justifying that cost. Again, if we turn on some upscaling here, we're on DLSS quality. Obviously, there's no upscaling for AMD cards, so rip. So yeah, but we can see that the 4070 Super is at about 80 FPS at 4K here. Very playable. I mean, this game doesn't require super high FPS or anything like that. I don't know if in other areas, if your FPS would drop more, or once you build up your little Pokemon village or PAL village or whatever they want to try to call it here. If it gets more CPU limited in those areas, that's what I'll have to see later on. But you can see that the 4070 Ti Super is getting about 32% more performance here. It's good. It's worth the price premium if you can pay it or want to pay it. Now let's look at A Plague Tale Requiem. It's a little bit of an older game now, not crazy. I mean, it's only like a year old, I think. If we're at 1080p at ultra quality settings, we can see that even though this game is actually sponsored by Nvidia, AMD's 7900 XT is performing really well compared to the 4070 Super. 35% fast. You're getting like 160 FPS. I mean, it is killing it in this game. It runs super smooth. These cards are probably way too fast for 1080p, but if you really want to see 1080p performance, this is what it looks like. You know what I mean? They're just absolutely killing it. Now we go to 1440p ultra quality scaling. So this game always does upscaling, but ultra quality is basically native. You can see that the 7900 XT is 38% faster than the 4080 Super. It only costs 17% more. So that's a really good price to performance ratio if you want to jump up in price to get this card. Obviously, AMD does offer some other competition like the 7800 XT at around $500 right now, so costing less. I would assume that it probably performs similar to the 4070 Super in this game. Now we can see that the 7900 XT is getting about 120 FPS, very smooth. The 4070 Ti Super, the brand new card on the right, is justifying its 25% more price premium compared to Nvidia's $600 card on the left. It's getting about 113 FPS or so. Now 4K though, ultra quality scaling again. The 4070 Super, it just can't really handle 4K without some scaling or something like that. It's only getting about 44 FPS here. So if you are a 4K gamer or you plan to play at 4K, then you're probably going to be looking at the 7900 XT, which is getting like 58, 59 FPS, or the 4070 Ti Super, which is getting like 55 FPS. You can always use a little bit of scaling to get these cards, you know, up. And if you're on the Nvidia cards, you can use DLSS. Like this game doesn't even have FSR. Now jumping into Resident Evil 4 at 1080p, obviously, these cards, all of these are super fast. Run prioritized graphics, which doesn't have ray tracing on it. It's basically the high settings in this game. And the 4070 Super is over 100 or 200 FPS. I mean, you could play competitive Resident Evil 4. It got a little bit of crap when it launched for, you know, VRAM optimizations and stuff like that, but generally speaking, this Resident Evil 4 game, it runs really, really well. Now, the 7900 XT is like 18% faster, technically justifying its price premium, but you don't get things like DLSS and better ray tracing support. So yeah, but the 4070 Ti Super is only 15% faster than the 4070 Super. And we jump up to 1440p, we actually see the 7900 XT probably as the game is requiring more VRAM and more memory bandwidth. Now it's 26% faster than the 4070 Super. And the 4070 Ti Super is only 18% faster than the 4070 Super. So that's not justifying its price premium unless you really think that VRAM is going to be an issue for you. But if we look at the VRAM like actual utilization in the top, we can see that the game is asking for like on the Nvidia cards like 7.3 gigabytes and only using it about 6. Whereas on the AMD card, it uses more VRAM. It's asking for about 10 gigabytes and using about 7.6. If we go to 4K, 7900 XT is 36% faster than the 4070 Super. And by the way, you can look at these percentages and see about how much faster the 7900 XT is compared to the 4070 Ti. The 4070 Ti's Super is only 18% faster than the 4070 Super. So you can see in the middle that we're getting the most FPS on the 7900 XT at like 97, 96 FPS. 4070 Ti Super on the right is getting about 84 FPS. still fast performance for native 4K on high settings. But at the same time, the AMD card is just pulling ahead here, and it's in the middle of the pack in terms of price. Pretty good deal when you look at that there. Going to Remnant 2. This game was wild. Now, I don't know what was exactly wrong with the 4070 Super in this game, but it just does not perform as well as the other cards. We can see that the 7900 XT was 63% faster at 1080p native on high settings. The 4070 Ti Super was 46% faster on native 1080p high settings. It is crazy performance compared to the 4070 Super. Now, even with this performance gap, you can see that the AMD card is still pulling ahead here, even though it's cheaper than the $800 Nvidia card on the right. So definitely in terms of price to performance, it's still there. I am wondering if this game really likes memory bandwidth. This game doesn't really use a whole ton of VRAM, but maybe how fast the memory is, maybe it really likes that. On the AMD card, it does have the fastest VRAM, or it just really likes AMD. And I don't exactly know why. And man, that's a mystery we'll never find out. At 1440p, the 7900 XT, again, 65% faster than Nvidia is offering. Like if you just are playing Remnant 2, this game loves the 7900 XT, or this game hates the 4070 Super. Whatever way you want to look at it, but that's what is going down here. But again, the 7900 XT costs less than the 4070 Ti Super. I messed up my naming. Hopefully that the guy doesn't come for me and try to get my Ti. That's a pretty good look for the AMD card. This is definitely one of its best titles here. So if you know exactly why it's performing so well in this game, let me know in the comments below. I am interested to see that, but let's go ahead and look at DLSS or FSR quality at 1440p here. And again, the AMD card, it's just like, in all of these, it's performing super well. But what's interesting to see is the 4070 Ti does, Ti Super, so many names, so many letters. It's getting at 60% more performance than the 4070 Super now. So it's neck and neck with the 7900 XT. And that's probably because we are actually CPU limited. Even though I have the best gaming CPU in the world on my computer here, it is still CPU limited here, but we're CPU limited at a very high FPS, so it's not that big of a deal. So the 4070 Super is getting about 80 FPS, which is definitely respectable for 1440p Ultra. But if we look at the other cards, I mean, the 7900 XT is just like fast, man. I mean, it's over 100 FPS at 1440p Ultra. Like, what is this a card on crack or something? Like, I don't know, but this game, it loves this game, man. It eats it up for breakfast. And the 4070 Ti Super is, again, actually justifying its price premium over the 4070 Super by getting like 40% more performance here. It's not because of VRAM on these cards or anything like that. We're only using or allocating up to 10 gigabytes on the AMD card, which typically uses more VRAM. Now, if we go to 4K on high settings, you can actually see that the 4070 Ti Super, the beginning starts a little bit weird here, but it is what it is. The 7900 XT is 56% faster than the 4070 Super. And performance like this actually matters because the 4070 Super is at like 40 FPS. So that's a probably a range you might not want to play on, but the AMD card is getting over 60 FPS with 1% lows at about 50. And the 4070 Ti Super isn't hitting 60 FPS in this case. So the AMD card is actually getting you that performance that's going to push you over the edge to feel good at playing at 4K on native high settings. So if we turn on the quality upscaling from FSR or DLSS, again, I think FSR looks pretty bad in this game, but at 4K, I couldn't really tell. Like, if I'm being honest, I couldn't really see the difference between these. So you could probably use these upscalers at 4K and be completely fine. But turning on quality upscaling is able to get the 4070 Super above 60 FPS, which might feel pretty good. You can see that the 1% lows are pretty low there. They're in the low 40s. So you might feel that. 7900 XT, again, 49% faster, I'll be exact for you guys. It's getting like 90 FPS at freaking 4K high settings in a game that is very freaking demanding. Remnant 2 goes super hard, man. And the 4070 Ti Super is 43% faster than the 4070 Super, getting close to 90 FPS. So this is kind of a neck and neck tie between the XT and the Ti Super. I don't know what to call this card to like shorten the name. And it's just really long. So if we go to Starfield, now this is a game that usually favors AMD cards even after the extra patches, which made it run better on Nvidia graphics cards. We're still seeing that the 7900 XT is significantly faster than the other ones at like almost 40% more performance, getting it like 120 FPS at 1440p native high settings. So this XT, I mean, it's killing it. But if we look at the 4070 Ti Super, it's only getting 18% more performance than the $600 card here. Not really justifying its price premium. And then if we turn on DLSS or FSR quality, which is actually 67% resolution scale, so that's why it's that. Starfield's a little weird with it. You have to drag a resolution slider in order to. You can say that 7900 XT is very fast, getting it at over 140 FPS. 4070 Ti Super on the right is getting 19% more performance than the 4070 Super at about 125, 126 FPS. We go to 4K though, we go to the high settings. You can see the 4070 Super, I mean, this is where it kind of starts to fall off a little bit. It's only getting like 50 FPS in a first person game, which definitely doesn't feel as good to play on. But if you go to the 7900 XT, it's 35% faster, and that's jumping us over 70 FPS average in this area. This area is very graphically demanding on the graphics card specifically. So yeah, this is pushing them to their limits, and you can see that the 1% lows are at about 60 FPS, so it would probably feel quite smooth. The 4070 Ti Super is only 13% faster here, so really not a good showing, and it's getting like 61 FPS. Now, if we do turn on some upscaling at 4K, I mean, like, again, like I said in the other games, you can't really see if you use quality upscaling at 4K. I couldn't freaking tell. Although I don't have a 4K monitor, so maybe I'm not a good example here. So I was just kind of looking what it looked like through my 1440p monitor. The 4070 Super with some upscaling is able to get over 60 FPS, actually in the mid 70s. 7900 XT is like almost 30% faster at like almost 100 FPS. I mean, we're so freaking close to that there. The 4070 Ti Super only 13% faster. Again, not showing very good performance numbers here. Now, I have this little slide here because I edit this in, and this is the ray tracing performance between these cards. And we're going to start off here first with Alan Wake 2. Now, this is using the ray tracing high preset and the high settings within the game. So this is basically max, and this is all path tracing. So if you know RT Overdrive and Cyberpunk, the ray tracing overdrive preset uses path tracing. So you can see here that the 7900 XT is actually 51% slower than the cheaper 4070 Super. So if you're really after ray tracing on this card, I mean, it is like the AMD card's getting crippled here. If we jump up to 1440p and actually choose a more reasonable set of settings, like low settings in this game while using ray tracing on the low preset, you can actually see that the 7900 XT is able to kind of like the gap isn't as wide when using a smaller amount of ray tracing. We also see that the 4070 Ti Super, even with these settings, this is lighter ray tracing and stuff, still isn't able to get, 50 FPS in this game or 60 FPS. That, like, even with the ray tracing, it can't quite get there. So, as I said, quality upscaling looks pretty good at 1440p. So if we do turn that on, you see that the 4070 Ti Super at $800 is able to use a little bit of ray tracing in Alan Wake 2 and still achieve over 70 FPS. So that is good at least. But, the 4070 Super, it's able to do over 60 FPS at $600. So it isn't exactly justifying the price premium. Now, if we go and max out this game at 1440p, I don't know why. I just had like a murderous intent when I did this, and I did that to the 7900 XT. I mean, that poor card, it's at like 11 FPS, and you can just see the slideshow that's going on there. The other cards are able to get kind of like a cinematic, like 24 to 30 FPS or so. And you can see the 4070 Ti Super, this is probably a VRAM thing. We can see that the 4070 Super is actually allocating over 12 gigabytes of VRAM. I don't know how that's working, but yeah, it's acting a little bit weird, and that is actually leading to the 4070 Ti Super, even with upscaling on, to pull in like 32% more performance here at 1440p. Now, using full path tracing and everything, and upscaling on the 4070 Ti Super, it is not able to get 60 FPS in the game. So you're paying $800 and you're still not quite getting there, which does feel really bad. I'm not gonna lie. Crank even more upscaling, so performance from DLSS or FSR. we can see that the 4070 Super is actually very close to 60 FPS. The 4070 Ti Super is at like 70 FPS. I wouldn't exactly say that the upscaling looks good at this resolution, but at least also the 7900 XT is able to kind of play the game at around 33 FPS. I just don't know why you'd even bother to play this on the AMD card. Like, it just doesn't run that well. Again, like, I am a mass murderer. I'm crazy. I went to 4K and turned it on max settings, and you can see the 7900 XT struggling at 5 FPS. Both the Nvidia cards, I mean, they're crying. The 4070 Super is at 12. The 4070 Ti Super is at 17 FPS. I don't know what was wrong with me. Like, man, I remember when I was doing these benchmarks, I was laughing like a maniac, man. You can actually just see how this footage is getting out of sync, because both the 4070 Super is running slow and the 7900 XT is just running super slow. It's not even close. It's not even close to being done with the benchmark run. Look at it go, man. Yeah, this just kind of proves, like, I don't know why you would bother to use ray tracing on this AMD card. Like, you don't buy it for ray tracing. Now, if we go to 4K and we use performance upscaling, which probably looks okay. Again, I don't have a 4K monitor to really look at this properly, but the 4070 Ti Super is like 27% faster here and is getting around the 40s. So you could maybe combine this with frame generation, which we will look at a bit later, and to actually get some kind of reasonable performance, but I don't think it's going to be that significant here. Now we go to Cyberpunk, and instead of actually using the ray tracing overdrive preset at first with the full path tracing, I wanted to look at RT Ultra, because this is slightly cut down. It's not as demanding, but it's still super demanding, just to see if the AMD card could hang here. You can actually see that the cheaper Nvidia card is faster than AMD's competition, which costs 17% more, and AMD's card is 14% slower. So that's a good price to performance advantage for the 4070 Super. Again, though, this is ray tracing, and none of these cards, even the $800 Nvidia card on the right, only getting like 50 average FPS. And in this benchmark run, usually the FPS is higher than it would normally be while you're playing the game. So I'd expect the 4070 Ti Super to probably be around 45 to 40 FPS while playing, and that's not exactly that good. If we use quality upscaling, you actually see here, I mean, I'm not saying the 7900 XT is like great at ray tracing here, but it's at least getting about 60 FPS with quality upscaling. So in a pinch on an AMD card, if you really need to use ray tracing, it could probably work. I'm not saying I wouldn't buy it for it. I definitely wouldn't. Because if we look at the 4070 Super, which costs less, it's getting like 75 FPS in this game, and that's actually pretty smooth for a first-person shooter like Cyberpunk. But if we look on the right, the 4070 Ti Super is only getting 11% more performance, and that's translating to like 88 from 78 on the left side. It's not justifying its price increase unless you really need that 16 gigs of VRAM. And even at this preset in this game, we're not using more than 12 gigabytes. Now, I am a little worried that very soon games are going to be using more than 12 gigabytes. Like if we turn on the ray tracing overdrive preset in this game. This uses more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM. You can see on the right side of the screen with the 4070 Ti Super, it's using over 12. That makes the 4070 Super run a little bit slower here, getting like 22 FPS. That's a cinematic experience if you ask me. It isn't getting good performance though. That's like the thing, is like you can pay more to get this ray tracing advantage for Nvidia's card, but it still can't run it. Like, it still can't do it. It's still under 30 FPS here. Now, AMD's card is surprisingly putting up more of a fight than I thought it would. I mean, it's at like 16. It's not good, but it's doing something. So if we turn on performance upscaling, so this is rendering up from 720p, upscaling it to 4K. I'd say that FSR doesn't look good with this, and DLSS is barely passable. I mean, DLSS even looks really blurry in this case. 4070 Ti Super is getting like 77 FPS though. So, I mean, you can get a smooth gaming experience with that card, and even you have enough frame rate you can also use some frame generation to get a bit more performance or a bit more visual smoothness out of it. Is on the left side, and it's getting like 72 FPS, and that's not really that far off from the 4070 Ti Super. So to me, it's kind of hard to justify that price premium. I mean, it's 25% more money on the Nvidia cards here. 7900 XT is at about 50 FPS. So in a pinch, if you really have to on this card, you could maybe use RT Overdrive. It's not great though. When we jump up to 4K, I'm a mass murderer, man. Like, I don't take that out of context. I'm not a mass murderer. But none of these cards, I mean, 4K with RT Overdrive, even just the VRAM, you can see on the right side of the screen, the 4070 Ti Super is using 13.7 gigabytes of VRAM at 4K here. These started in sync. The 4070 Ti Super is like way far ahead because it's genuinely running faster. It's like someone, like there's a PowerPoint presentation, and on the right side of the screen, they're clicking it faster. On the left side, they're clicking it slightly slower, and the 7900 XT one in the middle, they're clicking it. I mean, they're just chilling. I mean, the person's falling asleep while they're clicking this PowerPoint presentation. Turning on performance upscaling at 4K does let the fastest card here, the 4070 Ti Super, to get around 43 FPS. Not even ideal for this case, and that frame rate still isn't high enough to use frame generation or anything like that. We're gonna look at it, but it's not that good, okay? But if we do look at Fortnite and we go to Lumen, which is software kind of ray tracing from Unreal Engine 5, let's look at this at 1440p. You can see that all these cards are, getting over 120 FPS. The 7900 XT is still 8% faster than the 4070 Super, not justifying the price premium, but it's not that bad. And the 4070 Ti Super is getting 12% more performance compared to the 4070 Super. We're not getting CPU limited or anything like that here. So the 4070 Super is just, if you want to play Fortnite, it seems like it likes this card. I don't exactly know why, but it's getting good price to performance ratios here. You might have noticed too in all these benchmarks, the other cards have a power measurement in the top there that shows how much power the card is drawn. I couldn't get that to work on the 7900 XT. I don't exactly know why, but I just couldn't get it to work. If we go to hardware ray tracing in Fortnite, this is supposed to leverage the hardware on Nvidia graphics cards mostly. AMD cards aren't as good at this. If we jump up to 1440p, all the cards are still getting at over 100 FPS at native resolution, so that's pretty nice. And I'm only doing high settings. See, now the one on the right is scoped in. Like, I don't exactly know why that's happening. You can see I'm Gwen Stacy, and I just called Miles Morales. Rip, man. You wouldn't really play Fortnite at these kind of settings, but if other Unreal Engine 5 games are like this, like even like Palworld and stuff like that, which doesn't even use Lumen and stuff, if it's like this, then it could be quite good. And we turn on quality upscaling, you can see that. Then again, the 4070 Super is clearly the best value here because both of the other cards are like 20% about or more expensive than that card, but they're not getting 20% or more performance in it. So yeah, the 4070 Super is clearly the best option here. We got into Plague Tale Requiem. Now this game only has ray traced shadows in it, but they also don't even do that much to the look of the game. Like, you can play this game without ray tracing. You wouldn't even freaking know, if I'm being honest. But it's still an interesting benchmark to use because the 7900 XT, probably because of how fast it is in general, just turning on ray tracing doesn't hinder it a whole lot because it's just the shadows. So especially if you look at this here, it's still getting 18% more performance than the 4070 Super. And the 4070 Ti Super is faster than the 7900 XT. It's, I think, pretty much proportionally increasing its price to performance compared to that card. What's interesting though, and this might be because of the upscaling difference within this game, but the DLSS quality versus the quality temporal upscaling in this game that the AMD card has to use means the 7900 XT is getting 14% less performance than this 4070 Super, and then the 4070 Ti Super is getting 17% more performance than the 4070 Super. There isn't that many instances where 4070 Ti Super is actually justifying its price increase. At 4K, ultra quality upscaling here, we can see on high settings with ray trace shadows that the 7900 XT, the 4070 Ti Super are actually performing very similar here, even with the ray tracing. But when it comes down to it, I mean, all the cards are only getting like 30 FPS, so this isn't really settings you would probably be considered playing at. Now with the quality upscaling, that means again that the 7900 XT runs a lot slower at 4K. But the only card here, and maybe you could say this is an argument to justify the $800 Nvidia card here on the right side, is that it's 29% faster than the 4070 Super, and that is getting it up around 60 FPS. Now it is to consider that like we saw some frame jitters on all these cards. The 1% lows are kind of bad, but it doesn't really represent real performance in this game. This is like a cutscene, and every time the camera cuts, there's like a chance the frames could stutter. You can see that the Nvidia card on the right side, the $800 card, is able to get 60 FPS at 4K with a little bit of upscaling. So it is pretty good, all things considered. It doesn't, like this price premium doesn't seem to be unlocking a new level of performance or unlocking a new settings tier in games that makes it reasonable or not. The thing is, like if we run into a game like Resident Evil 4, which has a pretty light ray tracing implementation in it, I actually saw in a lot of cases that with the ray tracing on, I got better performance than with it off. So the AMD 7900 XT is still 14% faster than the 4070 Super, not really justifying its price premium. But you know, all these cards are over 200 FPS, or on the RT preset on all these cards, the 7900 XT is technically justifying its price increase. It's getting 172 FPS, and it's pretty much neck and neck with the 4070 Ti Super, which costs $800 compared to $710 on the 7900 XT. Now, if we go to 4K, this is where that performance, the extra performance could matter. So the 7900 XT, even with ray tracing, is pulling 37% ahead of the 4070 Super. This might be because of VRAM things. Maybe it's not showing the numbers correctly, that how much VRAM it's using. It's saying that this 4070 Super is only using like 6.2 gigabytes. But maybe it's using more VRAM, or it wants more VRAM. That's what's holding it back so much. You're taking a quick look at DLSS frame generation. Obviously, AMD has its competing technology, FSR3 frame generation, but that still isn't really in every game, and DLSS has a much wider implementation. People have modded it into games, so if you want to check out my video on how to mod FSR3 into games like Alan Wake 2, then you can go and check that out in the top right corner of the screen. But DLSS frame generation, if you have a high enough base frame rate, then you're able to do something like path tracing to Alan Wake 2 and get over 60 FPS, but the latency on it is pretty high. Now, if we look at a game like Cyberpunk on performance upscaling with, you know, DLSS frame generation, we're able to get 122 FPS. And actually, if we look at that latency in the top, it's at under 50 milliseconds. That's probably going to feel good to a lot of people. So genuinely, you could get 55% more smoothness by using DLSS 3 frame generation. Whereas you look on the right side of the screen and the 7900 XT is only at like 50 FPS with this performance upscaling. So it's having to use a ton of upscaling to get that. And the Nvidia cards are able to use, you know, DLSS, which does look better than FSR, and use this frame generation that's in more games to actually get more smoothness and in some cases more performance with things like ray reconstruction and stuff like that. And if we jump up to a resolution like 4K with performance upscaling, well, we can see if we use frame generation, it's not really saving. And this is something interesting that I have a theory of why this is happening. Frame generation is supposed to quote unquote like double your frame rate. But in this case, it's only getting us 32% more frames. I think this is because the cores, or the parts of the GPU that work on frame generation to make it happen, are getting overloaded by using DLSS performance upscaling, using all the ray tracing and stuff like that, and the ray reconstruction. There's so much that are relying on these cores that the frame generation gets pushed to the side, and it's only able to give 32% more frames. If we look at the latency, it's like almost, let's in like the mid 60 milliseconds to 70. It is pretty high. It's not exactly the best experience. Now we look at AMD's 7900 XT, well, you won't be able to do it on there anyways. If we look at frame generation in a game like Plague Tale Requiem, we know that the 7900 XT still gets good performance even with ray tracing here, with performance upscaling and stuff like that. If we look at frame generation, it's getting us only 46% more frames, but our latency is still quite good, and the base frame rate at over 100 was already good performance anyways. Like a DLSS frame generation is just kind of a winning more type of thing in this case. Actually, in a lot of games it is, because you need a lot of FPS to make it look good anyways. So frame generation is kind of a winning more thing, and it is in more games than what FSR 3 frame generation is at the moment on an AMD card. Now, hopping into Starfield using frame generation, this game, FSR 3 is coming to this game quite soon. It's supposed to come early this year, but we haven't seen it quite yet. And the frame generation is only getting us 37% more frames here. So that's only getting us from 100 to 125 FPS. So the latency is still good. So I don't exactly know how that's working. It's actually also lower than with frame generation off. So maybe it's like a low latency thing that's going on here. I mean, you know, I've had the Ti on for this video to represent the 4070 Ti Super, but honestly, I'm finding it kind of hard to represent this card. In almost every game that we showed, it is not justifying its price to performance increase. And there is so much hype building up to this card. It's like, oh, it's like they fixed the 4070 Ti, that Nvidia fixed their card. Woo, they could put 16 gigabytes of VRAM in it, which, don't get me wrong, I like this card as 16 gigabytes of VRAM, but the original 4070 Ti always should have had that much a year ago. I don't know what to say. Like, this card doesn't really justify even its price increase over Nvidia's own competition. And then if we put it into perspective against AMD's competition on the 7900 XT, since they dropped the price of that card to $710, which we've actually seen AMD do that before. This isn't the first time it's costed almost $700. I don't know if Nvidia didn't know that at $800 that AMD is just going to drop the price of their card to $710 and make it more competitive. But clearly AMD's competition there, if you're just after rasterization performance, 7900 XT is just a better deal all around. You get 20 gigabytes of VRAM too, which is really nice for gaming at 4K, wider memory bus width, which means it's also going to be better at gaming at 4K if you're more interested in doing that. And when you're paying like $700+ for a graphics card, it wouldn't surprise me if you want to game at 4K. So Nvidia's card here isn't exactly the most attractive looking card at that price point. The thing about is AMD's 7900 XT, it isn't even phenomenal either, because if you compare it to the 4070 Super, which costs $600, I mean, in some cases, the 4070 Super, I mean, it draws a lot less power, and like in a lot of cases, it's not that far in terms of performance. And then you're getting Nvidia's DLSS and better ray tracing support in a lot of games at a cheaper price point compared to AMD's $710 competition. The 4070 Ti Super almost feels like an upsell from Nvidia, because this gives you 16 gigabytes of VRAM, which the 4070 Super is definitely limited because of 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Yeah, it's basically just how much do you have to pay, because the 4070 Super at $600 is a good deal. The 7900 XT at $710 does justify the price increase over the 4070 Super. I mean, it's on average, from what I saw, like 30 to 40% faster. And then the 4070 Ti Super doesn't really justify the price increase versus the 4070 Super or the 7900 XT. The only thing is 16 gigabytes of VRAM on an Nvidia graphics card at a cheaper price point than what this 4080 Super is going to be at $1,000, which also has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Obviously, I just want to point out again too, like Nvidia sent me these cards for review, but they did not morph my opinion on this in this video, because obviously I'm not too thrilled about this card. I think it's okay. You're paying $800 where there is better value out there already. So let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. I don't think the 4070 Ti Super is living up to the hype. Obviously, this has been a lot of work. I have a lot more comparisons built up and ready to go. I have so much like footage and testing. I only went over a fraction of it in this video. I have been a gremlin. Like, when I say that, I have been a freaking gremlin testing graphics cards, and I have a new test PC, a 2 PC setup. It has been all grind here. So obviously system specs in the description if you want to check that out. Let me know what you think about the 4070 Ti Super in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Y'all have a good one, and peace.